Hello, everyone. This is Team D, representing me, Eric, Jesse, Madison, and Hank. Our project is NeuroRuler. Um, it's previously called the Head Circumference Tool, but we wanted to give it a cooler name, so we called it that. Anyway, basically, if you do not remember from the midterm or the final presentation, it's basically you can upload an MRI image and it will calculate the head circumference. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen to kind of show the setup part. Hopefully you can see it. So you can use pip to install. You just type it in, and this part can take a minute. I don't know, I think I last installed it like a week ago, so let's go for all the requirements and see if anything is different. And oh, pip is different, but anyway. So to actually run it, you have to open up a Python um, shell, and then do, let's see, is it import GUI from, sorry, from NeuroRuler.gui, import GUI, and that works, that's good. And then GUI, and then boom, this is the latest of the production that we've released. Um, you can also, you can get clone to use the latest version also, which we'll be using. So you can do like python gui.py, and that will launch what's in the Git repository. So yeah, so this version is slightly newer. We'll talk about some of the experimental features later. But I'm gonna switch over to Jesse for the main demo.
Cool. So I think Eric's screen might not have been sharing it might not have been fully screen sharing,
Oh, sorry.
but yeah, no problem. All right, so we're going to do, I already have it pip installed. So if you have it pip installed, then you do from GUI, and then you would run the GUI like that. And this is our latest version installed on pip. If you're a developer, then you would have cloned the repository like I have here, and then you can run the GUI script. And this does the same thing as what I just did in the Python terminal, except this is, of course, not uploaded to pip. This would have any experimental features that you just updated, right? So the first thing is that when you open up the GUI, it starts out in the disabled mode, and you have to open an image to enable it. So go here, and then we'll go to data and upload some nerd MRI image. There you go. It appears on the right side. And this is what we call settings mode, where you have all these settings that you can adjust. And let's adjust the rotations. Here's the X rotation. Here's Y rotation. And here's Z rotation. I'm going to reset that, and now just the slice. And so all that works. And do notice that if you hover over some element, and this is pretty much all the elements, if you hover over it for long enough, you'll get this tooltip, this little box that shows up here. And you also instantly get at the very bottom left some information. I do want to point out that these rotations, you can do incremental increments of 1 degree or -1 just by left clicking on the ends like this. All right. And now we'll talk about the views. So if you go to coronal view here or sagittal view, you'll notice this slice indicator. We only care about, when we compute circumference, we only care about circumference of the axial slice. So if you're on sagittal view, you'll get a slice indicator for where the axial slice would be. So if we go like right here, our axial slice is going to be right at the tip of the head. If you go just a little bit above, you'll see now we'll get some noise in the image because we're off the head. Right, so I'll reset, and it does not reset the view. That's a feature, not a bug. And let's go coronal. Let's hit apply, and this will automatically send you to the axial view to get circumference of the axial slice. This is
Yeah,
what circumference.
The point is that from just purely the axial view, it's very difficult to see like if you're actually looking at the right part of the head when measuring the circumference.
Right. Yeah, good point. So like if you're on axial here, then like I have no idea where I am, but if I'm on coronal, then I can see where I am. Yeah, good catch. And then once you hit apply, you get sense of circumference mode. And here you'll set this top label. The image first gets a contour, and then at the top it'll display using our algorithm what we think the length of this contour is, and that would be the circumference of the head. And so that was from axial view. So coronal view would send you to axial. And if you're in axial already, then you just get the contour of this slice. And I'll talk about these other options. These are a little more advanced. So the smoothing options, what happens to the image is after you get the rotation and slice or whatever, then you need to smooth the image. What's happening here is there's an isotropic gradient filter applied to the image to smooth it first. So see that if I hit preview here, the image did become a little smoother. Let me just up the numbers a little bit so you can see it better perhaps. So, and let me reset, and then like here you can definitely see it got more smoothed. So you can see that when I hit preview, this shows you what happens to the image when you hit apply. So this always happens when you hit apply, but if you want to see what's going on, you'd hit preview to preview what happens. And if you really want to like mess with that, you can see time step. If you set to something like really high, you'll get something wavy, but usually you'll want this around this number. We do have reasonable default values, as you can see. So right now I've changed them because I hit preview, but if you had like from the start, it would have been reasonable default values, which I think were 3 and something like 5 or something. All right, so that's the smoothing options. And after smoothing is applied, you do a threshold. What threshold does is it generates basically a binary image. By default, we use something called the auto threshold, which has it automatically generates lower and upper threshold values. But if you want to be precise about it and you want to control the threshold values, you can use what's called the binary threshold. And here you can set values something like, well, we can do 100, 200, and you can see, or 0, 200, and you see this would just be really bad. We try something like 100, 200, get something like this. And we could try to get the circumference of that. And you see it does compute a different contour, different circumference, because these happen to be bad values. But if you did something reasonable, which I'm not sure what that would be for this image, if that looks reasonable, then you'd get something reasonable as a result. All right, but we do recommend auto usually. Like usually you just get reasonable contour from that.
Yeah, it's just the default.
Yep. And that's one image. We'll now go to multiple images. So if I go to open and I do 3 images, you'll see I have 1, 2, 3, and it wraps around back to 1. And let's do also add image. So the difference between open and add is add will just append to the list, open will overwrite it. So if I add on this one, then that's an image number 4. If I open, then now it would just be a list of length 2 if I do open. So all these images have the same properties. You can only, so all the loaded images in the GUI will have the same properties. That means dimensions like this and spacing like that. So all the images have the same properties. And that means we can use global settings since the images are pretty much the same. They already come from the same batch. So if you do like X rotation that, then the next image, you also apply that same setting. And that's because all the images they should have the same properties. So what happens if you try to load, if I press open, I use the keyboard shortcut there. If I go to open and I purposely select maybe something like this, and I go down here and this image definitely has a different spacing value or dimensions, you'll get this little error saying this thing has different properties, you can't load it. So all the images have to have the same properties to be loaded. If you want to, so again, since the settings are global, if you wanted individual settings, then you would just load images one by one. And that's how you would get individual settings. All right. And we can now talk about a few more of the menu options. So there is, if I go to Actually, this is fine. So if we have one image and you remove an image, it doesn't delete it from disk, but it does remove it from the current batch. So there you go. It disables the GUI because there's only one image. If I have a few more, then remove image will just remove that one. And we can also do export image here. So if you want to export to PNG, you can notice that that just went into the output directory here. That's the image. If I were to hit apply to it to get the contour, so now we are in circumference mode here, but we can export PNG again. This would export another one, has a slightly different name, and this would have the contour on it. So that's a few of the exports. And we'll talk about this export CSV. That's a little bit different later. We also have this help menu with a link to our GitHub. I have it open in a separate tab, but it is here. And then we also have a similar link to our documentation site, and that brings you here. Great. And we also have this view with credits. Here's our team and our client, Professor Martin Steiner. And there is a full screen mode. And the final thing we have is this little advanced menu that we used a while ago for essentially testing. This is something you'll never use, but we can display icons in the GUI. We have the dimensions of the current image, the properties, which are all of these, the direction matrix of the image, and the pixel spacing of the image, which I'll actually talk about right now. So we actually do support if an image, say, for example, most images will have pixel spacing 111. So if I go and I do some random image, like perhaps this one, it's probably gonna have spacing 111, which is good. But if you happen to have an image with some different spacing, such as this is a 0.5, 0.5, 0.51, then we actually, if you hit circumference here, we get something like 442. If you actually, this image was actually constructed, so this one was made from that, and we just changed the spacing values manually. So if you remember from before, the 0.5 spacing one was about 442. So this was the base image that was generated from. You can see that the circumference is pretty much the same, even though the spacing was totally different. So we do handle relatively correct calculations for non-111 pixel spacing. It doesn't have to be exactly correct. There is like a small bit of inaccuracy, but that's expected. And on top of that, we also tested using unit tests, and I can show that a little bit here. So we tested, we were given data from our client, like a bunch of images, and then also you can see these TSV files with ground truth data computed from the previous head circumference tool. And we tested those values. We tested our values against ground truth data. And if we go to somewhere here, I think we have unit tests saying that the R squared value between our values and the ground truth values are above 0.98. So basically, we're pretty confident that our results are correct for like a bunch of images, and also specifically images with weird pixel spacing. And I think that's about it for me. Just one more thing. We do have a bunch of, if you go to the file menu, we have a bunch of shortcuts here. You can see on all the menus, there's a few shortcuts that you can use. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'm gonna turn it back over to Eric for importing and exporting settings.
All right, yeah. I guess exporting in general, I don't know if you talked about that much. Um, yeah, I'm going to share my screen. So some of this stuff is a bit experimental currently. Right. Also, another thing I wanted to bring up that Jesse didn't bring up, on macOS, the menu bar is native. That was actually kind of a lot of work from what I understand. Whereas in Windows, we have a more regular menu bar here. But anyway, so for import export stuff, take any image, uh, calculate the circumference, and you can press the export button here. And what happens? Well, if we go to our output folder here, this is the output folder. Um, it does not export an image per default, but it exports the results as well as all of the settings that were put into it. So, you know, if you're a researcher, you want to have these results be reusable, you want all of the inputs to be included. But in the GUI, using export, you can also export the actual measurement here of the, excuse me, the actual image with the contour that the circumference is calculated from. So yeah, that's exporting. You can actually use the same files um, of exporting to import using this button. So if you take a JSON file of the same format, you can import it, and it will come up with all the same settings. First, you have to click Apply again to calculate the circumference, or to recalculate if you need. But yeah, that's the basics of the import and export functionality. Again, it's somewhat experimental right now, but we're working on that. So another thing I wanted to talk about, for the GUI, there are a number of config options that can be set to the JSON file. So there's one for debugging, there's one for the initial file browser, and then there's a bunch of others, including the theme. So for example, I'm not really a big fan of the dark mode. It kind of hurts my eyes to read. Might be an unpopular opinion, but so it is for me. So I can switch to light mode if I want, and there we go. There's some other stuff for like the width and height ratio, which we've had to experiment with a lot in order to get working on everyone's screens. But if it doesn't work on your screen for some reason, you can adjust it again. So next I'm going to be talking about the command line, and right now I'm in the experimental branch for exporting, importing, so I'm going to switch back to main real quick. It's actually a little bit outdated. But anyway, so for the command lines, um, right now you have to have the repository clone to actually use it. But basically you can just type in like python's CLI.py, and if we include the little h here, it'll give us all of the parameters that we can possibly use. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar to the GUI in terms of what you can do. Um, you have to give it a file, and then all the other options there are defaults for. But you give it X, Y, and Z rotations if those are applicable. You give it what slice. Per default, it will just go in the middle, the same as the GUI. All of the advanced options are there as well, and including like which filter to use if you want to use Otsu or binary. And yeah, there's also a raw option that I can talk about in a minute. But let me just give you a kind of sample command. And really, I don't think we need a lot more than like one or two. But for example, it'll calculate the circumference of this file. It calculated it to be 433. So these unit tests I've made will check that it's the same as the GUI. So yeah, to go back to raw, basically the advantage of the raw is that if you're using this in an automated fashion, it will print out just kind of the raw number here. Um, so you can use Bash or whatever else um, to like export this, um, like part of the pipe or something. I don't know. It's really up to you. Um, so like in Bash, I'd probably do something like this, and then you could just kind of print out um, each output into one big file. I don't know, but yeah, it's a useful feature for scripting, I think. Anyway, um, one last thing is you can configure all of the default command line options for a config, sort of similar to the GUI, um, but you can set kind of the default rotations and advanced settings as well, the threshold filter. So yeah, I think that's basically it. Do you want to add on anything, Jesse?
Yeah, just like one small thing.
Hmm.
So essentially we do have, as Eric showed, two ways of configuring options. If you clone the repo, you have access to these, so the CLI configuration JSON file and the GUI configuration JSON file. But then Eric also showed you can just we do have GUI scripts as well. So if you do like the GUI scripts -h, you can apply some settings here. Or if you do like Eric showed the CLI scripts here, these are very basic. This is essentially what you would, this is exactly what would happen if you like used pip and then you had a Python terminal open, but it's just a script for developers essentially to test stuff without uploading to pip. If you use these, then any CLI options that you do will override whatever's in the config JSON file. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we covered all the high points of our project.
Yeah,
But
maybe one more thing. I think that's we have pretty robust documentation. Um, so maybe check that out. I can share my screen very briefly. So like this is our website, which has this is mostly developer documentation, but has documentation for all of the libraries that we use. Um, and then like every method is kind of included, for example. So that's potentially very useful for future developers. We also have a lot of information in our README, and yeah, as well as some like continuous integration tests, which will like run the unit tests that we made. Um, so yeah, I mean that's all I have.
yep, that's pretty much it. That's the entire project. It was a really cool project, and I think all four of us really enjoyed it. And I think all of us are really proud of the great work we've done. And thanks for watching this video.
Thank you.